warm welcome everyone to today's session in conjunction with VTI and jobs.ac.uk. Thanks to them for inviting me to talk to you today. My name is Dr. Mhairi Towler and I will be guiding you through today's session. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today to share some insights that I've learned about presentation skills for researchers. It's a key skill that we all need to hone if we're going to communicate our work to various audiences, whether that's academics, students, investors, or the public. We need to learn how to communicate clearly. I'd like to give you a bit about my background so you know why I can deliver some wisdom on today's topic of presentation skills. I have a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry and a PhD in Molecular and Cell Biology from the University of Dundee. I was then a postdoc for 11 years, both out in San Francisco and back in Dundee. During this time, I founded the Postdoc Association to help career progression of early career researchers in life sciences, and also completed a postgraduate certificate in teaching and learning in higher education. As part of this, I had to address how to make teaching more engaging for large groups, and so developed an animation of a cell. I enjoyed this project so much that I decided to retrain with a Master of Science in Animation and Visualization and set up my business, Vivo Motion, in 2012. We make animations to help scientists communicate their research. As well as making animations, I provide training on the visual presentation of research for early career researchers like yourselves. I did a stint of online lecturing during the lockdown at Dundee and Angus College, and I'm also a mum of 7-year-old twins, so went through the nightmare of homeschooling while also teaching online. Some of you might be able to relate to this. Throughout my career, I've delivered workshops, tutorials and lectures face-to-face and virtually. I've presented to students at international conferences, pitched to investors and sat on panels. So with this variety of presentation scenarios, I would like to share with you some tips that I've picked up along the way through experience as well as from training to help me with presenting. The topics that we're going to cover today fall into 3 groupings. Firstly, narrative, audience and confidence. What's the story you want to tell and who is your audience? These first 2 topics are closely linked and we need to think about our audience constantly when constructing the story. How do you build your confidence to convince your audience about what you're telling them? I have some practical tips on how to build your confidence, as we all suffer from a lack of confidence at times. Secondly, post-pandemic, we may be expected to work in a hybrid environment and present face-to-face and/or virtually, and how to include everyone in these contexts, which involves consideration of equality, diversity and inclusivity. There are some practical things to consider here that we can think about when designing our slides. The final group involves some tips on how to build your network and landing the job interview that you're after. As an academic, you will have to tell your story at some point. You'll have to tell it and sell it, whether that's for grant funding, at a conference, or sharing your career journey, for example. Of course, the narrative you create will be context specific, and if you're creating lecture material, there may not be an actual story, but rather information and facts. If you were doing a pitch for investors, you could use the rule of 3 to get 3 short points across. Or if you're presenting at a conference, you might want to think about 3 key points that you want to get across to the audience. Just remember, stories have a beginning where you set the scene, a middle, the juicy bit where the action happens, and an end. We learn by doing, so that if there are some practical exercises you can do to get the students to take in your key messages, then try these out. This could be discussing a case study, for example, or taking a quiz to reinforce what you've been teaching them. People often forget about a call to action at the end. Again, this is context specific, but it could be asking people to get in touch with you, to link in with you on LinkedIn, or to tweet about your work. What do you want people to do as a result of hearing your presentation? Does your story have the following ingredients? Is it relatable, and how does your audience relate? Great stories build relationships and make people care. Can you get your audience to feel your emotion or passion? And this is something that I learned about when I went to art college. My tutor said to me, how do you want people to feel after they've seen your animation? And coming from a science background, that was quite a difficult thing to connect with because we were used to presenting facts and figures. Novelty, what makes your research story different? What is unique about it? And is there any tension or controversy around the topic that you are researching? So in the audience, who is your audience? Are they experts or non-experts? What jargon or acronyms do you need to remove if it's a general audience? Think of your audience at all times when preparing your narrative. Keep them front of mind. How do you want them to feel? What do you want them to think? The audience are not tigers who want to eat you, just an audience who want to hear what you've got to say. Questions to consider when thinking about our audience. How do you build a rapport with them? How do you keep people interested? Ask questions to keep people interested. You will see people doing this all the time in TED Talks. They will ask the audience a question, or even ask them to do something physical. How do you avoid misinterpretation? And are there any metaphors you can use for your research? And finally, is there an ask at the end? Once we've our narrative and audience considered, let's think about confidence to deliver. So with confidence, we're going to talk about 4 things: imposter syndrome, using the physical body to help us deal with nerves, and how to turn nerves into excitement. Nerves just show that you care. It's the adrenaline rush that allows you to focus on the task at hand. So nerves are a good thing. I would be lying if I said I wasn't nervous before today. This is the biggest audience I've ever presented in front of. But the key to it all is preparation. In the run-up to today's webinar, I had many meetings with Vitae and jobs.ac.uk to get things organised so that the content was what they were looking for, as well as considering technical issues. First of all, imposter syndrome. So here's a definition of it. It's the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. Have you ever said to yourself, I don't know what I'm doing here. Any moment now, someone's going to find out I'm not up to this job. If you have, then you're amongst 70% of people who suffer from imposter syndrome. And it can get in the way of our confidence and result in us second-guessing ourselves. So if you are presenting, what you need to remember is that in whatever context, you have been asked to do this for a reason. You're an expert on a topic, so you need to embrace your status as a speaker. Your voice and what you have to say matters and will add value to someone. Viv Groskop talks about the concept of happy high status in her podcast, How to Own the Room. So I would really recommend you listen to her podcast because there's lots and lots of different tips on presenting. However, you have to remember that you wouldn't be doing what you're doing if you weren't qualified or experienced enough to do it. So if you've been asked to speak at a conference, it's because you are the expert on the topic and no one else. If you'd like to find out more about this, then check out some free online training with Lucia Juarez. I've put her website there. Using the physical body to control nerves and build confidence can be very effective. Here we can employ some skills that actors learn at drama school. When I was younger, I did a lot of musical theatre, and when on stage we were always told to look up and project our voice. We also used breathing exercises to control our voice when singing and delivering lines. So using the breath, the voice, and did you know, for example, that Margaret Thatcher changed her voice to make it sound lower and therefore more commanding? Posture, which is a really good one to know about, and pace can all help with delivery of a presentation. So using the breath. If you're nervous before a talk, take a few moments to take some deep breaths. Breathing exercises can slow down the adrenaline and the fight or flight response that we feel when we are on stage, either virtual or real. Even take time to do this when on stage. Take a moment to look around the room and make eye contact with a few people. It will get the audience's attention and signal to them to be quiet as you're ready to begin. Then, once you've taken a few breaths, speak on the exhale. obviously try not to hold your breath. So you need to practice this technique so you're ready for the real thing. Think about opera singers and how they sing the phrases of the music. I sing in a choir, and breathing is everything for smooth delivery of a piece of music. So remember, breathing. With the voice, you need to be intentional about the tone of voice that you use. So thinking about if you wanted to be authoritative and get your point across, you might use a voice from kind of within your belly. You need to warm up your voice. So again, like professional singers do, they wouldn't go on stage to sing without warming up their vocal cords. Project to the back of the room if you're on stage. So this involves, again, breathing and holding your head up, and also have water with you. So there's nothing worse than if you're so nervous that your mouth dries up. So make sure you have water at hand in case you need to take a sip. Posture. So Deborah Frances-White tells us in a talk, which I've put a link to here, to take up more space. She tells us how we can train ourselves not to feel sick before a talk, and tell yourself that nerves equals excitement. Apparently in a poll, the number one fear on a public poll is public speaking, with number 2 being death, which shows you how much people fear public speaking. So uncross your legs and arms, hold your head up, and ground yourself through the feet. Sometimes I like to think of roots growing down through my feet into the ground to steady myself. Use intentional gestures. So Tony Blair, the politician, was famous for this in his speeches, using his hands to get a point across. Keep your head still and don't be playing with your hair or jangling coins in your pockets. A TED talk by Amy Cuddy also talks and tells us about power posing. So power poses can get you psyched up, but there is some science behind it. So if you can, before a talk, go to the restroom or the toilet and stand like Wonder Woman with your arms outstretched in a star shape. These power poses do change the level of hormones in our body and can make us feel more confident. It does work, I've tried it. Pace. So the most important thing that you can do to feel more confident is to slow down. Again, engage the use of the breath. At the end of every sentence, take a breath. Practice taking a breath at every punctuation mark. It allows us to get rid of filler words such as and To you, it will feel like an eternity and that you're going very slowly, but it won't feel like that for the audience. Finish your sentences. Don't trail off. Everyone has a natural pace of delivery, so find out what yours is. Some people speak more quickly than others. And use pauses for effect. These can be thinking pauses, a pause to let the audience absorb what you've said. So, did you understand that pause? And maybe a check your notes pause if you're using notes. Dealing with nerves. So remember to breathe. Again, breathing is all important. But ahead of an event, you might want to try meditation in order to calm yourself down if you're extremely nervous. You might also want to take some exercise. This can help to burn off any excess adrenaline. Visualization exercises are excellent for dealing with nerves. So visualize the scenario that you're going to be in and visualize the outcomes that you want to happen. If we rehearse things in our heads before we do it, it will go as we plan. This is what Olympic athletes do. The tapping solution is an app that also deals with anxiety and nerves. So you can check that one out. And journaling might also to help you to get your feelings down on a piece of paper. But the key to it all, I would say, is preparation and practice, practice, practice. You must rehearse your presentation, if possible, in the room that you're going to do it in. Practice delivery for timing, so you know it will fit into the time slot you've been given. As a rule of thumb, I like to give 1 minute per slide. It's very rude and quite frankly arrogant to think that your talk can run over into someone else's time slot if you're speaking at a conference. If you're doing a business pitch, they will just cut you off if you've not finished, so your main take-home message might get cut out. This won't happen if you've practiced the timing. If any of you have ever given a Pecha Kucha talk, you will know that you get 20 slides, which are 20 seconds each, and the slides move forward automatically after 20 seconds. So if you've not practiced the timing for this, it can go horribly wrong. Tech considerations are a big thing, so if you can find out what the computer setup will be ahead of time, that will also help you put yourself at ease. Do you have to send slides ahead of time? Will you have to bring a USB stick with your slides on and transfer them onto the organiser's computer? It's a good idea also to bring your own laptop with adapter cable and power cord, just in case. Will you be able to see the presenter view in PowerPoint? How many screens will there be? All of these things are things to think about ahead of time. Sometimes you will be asked to wear a microphone, so make sure you have a pocket that you can slip the box into. And ladies, if you're wearing a dress, then be aware that the mic wire may have to go up from the bottom. So it's best to wear separate top and bottom so it's easier to feed the mic wire in, or wear a jacket with a lapel for the mic to clip onto. If you're using a handheld mic, don't hold it too close to your mouth because this can result in some feedback. You may also have to hold a laser pointer and have to move the slides forward. So there's a lot to consider. Again, listening to the podcast by Viv Groscott, How to Own the Room, is a great idea as it has lots of tips for presenting. I'd now like to go on to the topic of different settings that you might be asked to present in. So this could be face-to-face, virtual, pitching, interviewing, teaching, or sitting on an expert panel. With face-to-face presenting, you need to build a rapport immediately. Chat to people as they come in, just saying good morning, good afternoon. For housekeeping, let them know that the slides will be sent on, the procedure in the event of a fire, plan for breaks, etc., and ask them to turn their phones off. Obviously, introduce yourself, even if you said hello to some people as they've come in. And with icebreakers, most people don't really like icebreakers, but it is a good way to get to know who's in the room. So you might want to put them into pairs, ask them to introduce their partner, or get them to draw their research, just as a fun idea. What do you need in the room? So what's the chair setup? Is it going to be in a horseshoe shape? Do you want desks? Do you need a whiteboard, post-its, paper and pens, etc.? Or do you want the chairs to be in rows or groups round a table? Will you be in a lecture theatre or a room? Again, thinking about what the tech considerations are in those different settings. Does the audio work, for example, if you need it? Do you need a microphone or not? Do you need to dim the lights? All of these things are things to be thinking about when you enter a new environment to present your work. With virtual presentation, things can be a bit more familiar because you're used to using your own computer. But again, you can build a rapport with people as they start to appear online. Ask them their name and a hobby or put their location in the chat box. This makes people feel valued and included. The waterfall technique is basically a technique where you might ask people to put their favourite song into the chat box, but they do it on the count of 3. So get them to think about the song, type it into the chat box, and on your count of 3, press return. This gets people involved from the get-go, using the chat function and asking a general question to start involving people immediately in an interactive way. Housekeeping on virtual presentation. Again, make sure everyone is muted and that the cameras are off if you would prefer that. I actually do prefer cameras to be off because I think sometimes it can be a little bit distracting when you're seeing lots of different faces, because you start looking at what's going on in their houses and are there pets in the picture, etc. So I ask people to put cameras off, and it can also affect the quality of your presentation. If you're recording, do you have permissions to do this? So sometimes when I've presented for other universities, I haven't had permissions to record. So you need to check that beforehand. How to raise tech issues or questions. Consider that people might be multitasking, so they might be emailing or on social media at the same time. So ask them to set their intentions at the beginning of the session about how engaged they want to be and how much they want to get out from the session. Tell them that slides will be sent on if they haven't already. Pause to look at the chat box for questions near the end, and inform them of the plan. Are there going to be any breaks? It's reassuring for people to know what's going to happen during the course of a session. Some other tips for presenting online. You basically need an extra pair of eyes, because if you've got two screens, then you will have your slides on one screen, people's faces or boxes on the other, and the chat box. You need to remember to click audio on if you have any audio in any of your slides. This is just a little click button in Zoom and Teams, but you have to remember to turn it on. Tools such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams register, the register is taken automatically, but sometimes when I have a break, I just do a little register to make sure that I've got a note of everybody who's attended. Have two screens if possible, one for your slides and one for the participants in the chat. You can also use breakout rooms for group discussions, and there are quite a lot of tools now to enable you to interact with students, such as whiteboard tools. Padlet is a good one, Mentimeter for taking polls, and Slido for creating word clouds. So there are loads and loads of tech tools now. Some go a bit too far, I think, but it can make your sessions more engaging. You may be in a hybrid setup, which is more commonplace now, with universities wanting to cut costs and speakers, considering the impacts of travel on the environment. This is the least predictable in terms of interaction with students. It's difficult as you don't have access to their names, so it's hard to call people out to ask a question. So this is when you might be online, but the participants are there in person, or you're there in person, and there's a mix of participants online and there in person. It's difficult to hear what the participants are saying if you're online and they're there in a room, but you just have to make the best of it. You might meet a meeting owl, so basically that's what's on the picture here. Its eyes track you and follow whoever is talking in the room. And this is another new tool that's come about as a result of hybrid teaching. Just a comparison of face-to-face versus online. What's the same? We always have to build rapport with the audience as they're coming in. We'll use slides, probably the same slides in both scenarios, and we will use people's names if possible. What is different? You might have live subtitles if you're presenting online. Taking a register obviously is different, and the tools that we use are different, and the way that we interact is different. But there are possibilities to interact online if you look at the different tools that I've spoken about. Equality, diversity, inclusivity is something that we need to consider when we're presenting online or face-to-face. So first of all, we need to encourage contributions from everyone if possible, and for everyone to respect each other when discussing topics. Does your university have a safe space policy, for example, and are we treating everyone with respect? Using people's names when you can in order to include everyone is a good idea. Of course, this will depend on the size of the group. So usually for me, it's up to about 20 people. So I do try to learn people's names and write them down as participants come into the room, either online or in person. This helps me engage with the students as well. If it's the same person always answering the questions, encourage someone else to have a go. And if someone is dominating in a group when you're facilitating in person, go and stand over them. Using body language can show that they're not the most important person in the room, and it gives other people permission to have a go. Colour considerations are important when designing your slides. If anybody has a visual impairment, they might be using screen readers, therefore you need to put in alternative text. So make sure that you've run your slides through an accessibility tracker. And there's a tool here at Adobe Colour that allows you to check what colours work for people who are colourblind. Subtitles or closed captions can be live, but they don't always pick up on the nuances of our different accents. So it's a good idea to have a practice with these, as they also can be off-putting if you haven't used them before. But you might want to just say that you'll send on a version with subtitles afterwards. With cultural barriers, sometimes people lack confidence to speak if English isn't their first language, so encourage them to speak and have patience when understanding what they say. If you don't know how to pronounce someone's name, ask them to pronounce it. And just be authentic with this. Simplify slides also to consider that some people may also be reading subtitles at the same time. With unconscious bias, this can crop up in many different ways. One thing I used to do unconsciously was converse with people who seemed to be engaging with me, and sometimes these were the dominant people in a group, so I had to work hard to include those who were a bit quieter. And finally, do people have their cameras on or off? This is really a choice that you should give to people. I do ask people to put their cameras off, but that's just because it can be distracting for me. And it depends what we're doing. If we're having a discussion about a particular topic, then I might have their cameras on so that I can see their faces. But if I'm presenting slides, I usually ask them to turn their cameras off. Your network is going to be one of the most important tools you have in progressing through your career. People who know about you and know about the wonderful work that you do will be how you get ahead in life. One of the biggest assets in anyone's life is a generous network, and this is taken from the Harvard Business Review in 2013. I've been fortunate that I've had people who have been very generous with their time when I've asked for it, and you should try to also give back to your network. So if you can give something back to others, then you should do so. You shouldn't always be approaching people just to ask them for something. You might just want to get in touch and say, do you fancy a catch up and a coffee? So it's not always asking for something, but really just nurturing your network also. So what does networking mean? Well, networking is the building and maintaining of relationships with a wide range of individuals, groups, or institutions who share common interests, goals, or expertise. And sometimes the word networking puts people off, but it's really just about building relationships within your own circle. Networking characteristics, well, it's people-centered. It's about forming relationships with people as a starting point to further develop these relationships in a professional sense. It's purposeful, it can be planned as well. And if you're attending a conference, for example, you should look at the attendee list ahead of time to see who's going so that you can target the people that you would like to approach. It's open-ended and relies on cooperation. It's not about using people, but using the information that they give you. And it's about asking people for their help and advice. And generally, if you ask people for help and advice, they will say yes. They're not going to turn you down. With networking, it's also about who knows you that's important. So again, it's about raising your profile and your work's profile. So why network? Well, again, it's about building relationships within your own organisation. You might also get invited to speak at conferences. It helps when you're changing career and getting your next job. So again, just seeking out people who you might want to approach for future job opportunities. It might help you to collaborate, so find partners to collaborate with in your research, and also just for looking for moral support. So it might be that you're networking more with your peers and you can share ideas about how to progress things, or if there's issues coming up within your work, you can share those and get moral support from one another. How to make your network work for you? Well, first of all, you need to identify your goals, professional or personal, because obviously you have a personal network as well. What information do you need to find out in order to progress those goals? And who do you know who knows this information? And what do you have to do to get that information? So some questions to ask yourself in terms of progressing this are: who are the people that you would most like to meet? Are there anybody in your field who you want to collaborate with? How do you find them? How can you promote yourself in the academic world? And you might want to just map out your contacts on a big piece of paper, because it might help you to see where there are overlaps, or where you can find the people that you're needing to get in touch with. You might surprise yourself actually at how big your network already is. Strategies for building your network: well, you should promote your work on social media if you can. So using LinkedIn is a great place for professional networking. Twitter, Instagram and TikTok now. If you have a website, or a lab website, or a website within your research setting, you might want to write blogs, podcasts, videos, put videos on YouTube. Keep in touch with your previous contacts. So this is what I was saying before about inviting people for a coffee. This just nurtures your network so that you're not always asking for a specific piece of advice, but really just keeping in touch with people to see how they're getting on. And then another one is joining committees. Now, the problem with joining committees is that it can sometimes take up a lot of time, so you need to be careful with that, but it is a good way to increase your network. At conferences, just some things to think about in terms of networking. Again, engage on Twitter. So if there's a hashtag for an event, then use that in your Twitter posts. This can get you noticed immediately at a conference. Apply to speak at a conference or present a poster. Again, these are opportunities to be sought out. You might want to ask to give a talk at another university. So again, if you've made contacts with people at other universities, you could say, I'd like to give a talk. Find out who's going to the conference ahead of time, and this again allows you to target your networking. Don't just stick with your own group. The reason that I've put this is that I used to work in a lab, and when we used to go to conferences, we tended to stick together instead of spreading out and speaking to lots of different people. So if you are in a big group, it's quite easy just to talk to the people you know, but you should give yourself a target to meet at least 10 new people at a conference or more. And also ask questions. So at the end of any sessions, put your hand up and ask a question. This also gets you noticed and raises your profile. So future actions for you: you should be starting to prospect for your next position now. Most academic positions at an early stage are fairly short, so 2 to 3 years or 3 to 4 years. So even if you're at an early stage in your PhD or at the start of a contract, you can be thinking about the next career step and what you want to do next. So start researching future workplaces and looking at how you can fund them yourself. Are you going to be applying for fellowships, for example, and what fellowships are out there that suit your line of work? So all these things require time and research. So just be thinking, what is the next step for you, and what do you want your future to look like? The impact of my network on my career is that I'm still in touch with my PhD supervisor, who helps me promote the training workshops that I run. Connections that I made during my PhD resulted in the first customers that I had when I set up my own business, Vivo Motion. Connections from PhD days still help me when if I'm applying for other jobs and I need a reference letter. And luckily for me, I have a global network because a lot of the people that I worked beside have now moved all over the world, France, Japan, America. So it's really nice to have that global network because you can then tap into their connections as well. So treat everyone in your network with respect. Try not to burn any bridges, because you never know in your future career when you might need to call on somebody from a previous role that you've had to help you with your next career step. For job interviews, obviously there's different scenarios here, but all of the things that we've talked about today, you know, building confidence, etc., these all feed into preparing you for a job interview. Most job interviews will request a sample lecture and an interview, so your presentation skills will be assessed. And yeah, all the things that we've talked about already today will be of use. So confidence and self-belief, dealing with nerves, etc., they will all help on the day. So remember, if you have an interview, it means that they've been impressed with you on paper, so you're qualified for the job. It's now your time to shine in the spotlight. If you get a choice of face-to-face versus online, I would choose face-to-face if possible. It allows for natural conversations around the interview timings and allows you to gauge whether or not you gel with a person. You can also just come away with a gut feeling about a place or a group of people, which is harder to ascertain online. So those are some of the pros, I would say, of getting a face-to-face interview. But if you do have to do a virtual interview or a telephone interview, then you just have to try and use your intuition about the people that you're speaking to. Remember to take your time answering the questions. Give yourself time to think before you speak. Just take a breath. So remember to breathe as well. And it's fine just to take a moment of silence to have a think about the answer to a question before you open your mouth. So sometimes with nerves, you feel like I need to speak immediately. They've asked me the question, but it's okay just to pause for a moment. So in summary, what we've spoken about today is, you know, building your narrative. So what do you want to speak about and to whom? So who's the audience? Things to consider for different presentation formats. So we've spoken about presenting face-to-face, we've spoken about presenting online, and we've spoken about hybrid environments as well. And then finally, we've spoken about how to build a successful network to get your next position. And really, the network is all about career progression and who you know. So it's about raising your profile and getting yourself out there. And luckily now with social media, we have lots of opportunity to do that. Here are some links for your reference that I've used in today's webinar. There's a career advice page at jobs.ac.uk, free training with Lucia Juarez, and then lots and lots of different resources, podcasts, etc. for you to have a look at after today. Thank you very much for listening and good luck with your careers, job interviews, presentations, whatever it may be. So please request to connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter and Instagram. If you have any questions, you can email me. It's vary@vivomotion.co.uk, and you can find out more about the other training that I offer at my website, www.vivomotion.co.uk. Generally, the training that I deliver is all about visual presentation of research. So if anybody's interested in that, please do get in touch. And thanks for listening. Bye for now.